Hey everyone, welcome to my next how-to tutorial, and for this week's video I am going to show you how to use this foot on the sewing machine, and it is a button attaching foot. It is going to follow on from last week's tutorial where I showed you how to use the buttonhole foot, and then next week we can combine the two and create a little project for ourselves. The reason I've chosen to do this is because the button attaching foot I think is a lesser used foot, but is a foot that can be utilised and will make your life a lot easier when you're doing some projects. It's not as scary as you think, so let's get on with it and show you how it works. For this demonstration I am going to use a ruler to measure the distance between the holes on each button, a piece of fabric which is just a cotton linen fabric that I've used on my other demos, a selection of buttons from very big all the way down to very little decorative ones, just to give you an idea of how to use the presser foot for each of these designs, and the button presser foot itself. For this demo we need to remove the presser foot that's already attached by pressing the release button at the back and it drops off, and replacing it with the foot that we need, which is this one. But before we do that we need to go to the back of the machine and drop the feed dogs. These little teeth that protrude from the bottom of the machine, they're called feed dogs, and we need them to be flush with the presser foot plate because we don't need them for this purpose. Something worth mentioning at this stage is that the machine is still turned off. I haven't switched it on, and you don't do that until you've lowered the feed dogs. So we just pull this switch across, it's quite tough, and it drops the feed dogs out of the way below the plate. Some features worth mentioning with this presser foot is that this little bar is where it attaches to the presser arm. This gap underneath is where the button fits. You can see it moves freely to allow different thicknesses of button. The two red dots are where you line the button holes up with, and the gaps between the metal are where the needle passes through to attach the button. This little arm here comes out when you're wanting to add a button that has a shank. So that is where you have a gap between the button and the fabric, and you would use that if you're using thicker fabrics. We can now add the presser foot to the presser arm, and you do this by just lifting the presser arm up slightly, positioning the foot underneath and dropping the presser arm onto the bar until it snaps in. There we go. I have already pre-threaded this machine, and if you want to see how that is done, please refer to one of my other videos which I will link in the description box below. Now everything's in place, we can turn on the sewing machine. For the first part of the demonstration I'm going to use just an average size button, and it's a 2-hole button, and we need to measure the width between the centres of the 2 holes. So taking a ruler, I'm going to place it here. The 0 I'm going to put in the centre of the first hole, and by my calculations the centre of the second hole is 5 millimetres. I need to bear in mind that it's 5 millimetres because that is what we're going to set the machine to. Once you've got the presser foot attached, you then need to select your stitch, and you need to select stitch 5. Stitch 5 comes with a preset distance between the 2 punches through the fabric of 3.5 millimetres. So we need to extend that to our 5 millimetres to fit the holes for that button. Something that you will do when fitting buttons to fabric is to mark where you want the button, and I have done that by adding these 2 little dots onto this fabric, and I'm now going to position that underneath the presser foot, and I need to line it up so that they are on the either side of the central metal prong, and lower the presser foot just over the top just so that I can see they're in the right place. I'm just going to adjust it slightly, there we go. And the holes need to be just a little bit further back than the edge of the plastic. Once your fabric is in place, lift the presser foot, take the button and place it into the foot and line the holes up just inside the plastic, and so that they're either side of that central prong, and then drop the presser foot again, and then that clamps it all down tight. Theoretically, at this point, you should just be able to press go on your machine, but I don't want any needle breaking, and I certainly don't want my machine breaking, so I use the handle at the side of the machine, and turning it towards me, I drop the needle into the first hole, and I make sure that the needle clicks across to the right position for the second hole. Once I've done that first stitch and I've made sure that the measurements are fine, I then press go. Now you have to have your machine at the lowest speed because you just want to make sure that you're not going to break anything. I like to make sure that my buttons are firmly on there, so I make sure I've got 10 stitches across. If you want to do more or less, that is totally up to you. I then press my needle up button, taking the needle out. I lift the presser foot and I can remove the button from the device. It can be tightly secured, so just be careful as you're doing that. Take it out to the side and cut the threads. You should then be left with what looks like this. It's the button attached to the fabric, and you've got 2 threads on the top and 2 threads coming from the underneath. Turn your fabric over to the threads that are coming out underneath and pull the first one, and you can see that it starts to bring the thread through from the front. That's a mouthful. The thread through from the front. Using an unpicking tool, take that loop of thread and pull it. So you're now left with 3 threads on the back. Take the other thread and do the same. And all 4 threads are now on the back of the button. Taking 2 threads in each hand, tie a knot, securing the threads tightly and making sure that the button won't come off. You have a button securely fitted to your fabric. Now we've got our first button attached, the presser foot should look a little less scary. We're going to move on to doing a 4-hole button, and then on to the other selection of buttons that I've got here, just to show you just how versatile this foot can be and how it can make attaching buttons easier for you. Now, even though this button is a 4-hole button, you still need to measure the distance between the holes. So taking your ruler, putting the 0 on the centre of the first hole, and I know it looks slightly off on the camera, but I'm doing it from my perspective, and the centre between the 2 holes is only 1 to 3 millimeters. So I need to change the distance for the stitch to 3 millimeters, and we should be ready to go. As we did before, place your fabric underneath the presser foot and put your button into the foot. Now, although we've got the 4 holes, what you do is push the button to the back of the presser foot and you line the front 2 holes up where you're wanting to place the thread. Then drop the presser foot. There wasn't much movement in there, that's because it's a thicker button. Again, manually winding the machine towards you, drop the needle into the first hole and making sure that it moves across the appropriate distance, drop it slowly into the second hole. Lift it out and it will go back to the start, then you can press go. You need to put the needle into the up position, lift the presser foot, which again it's not moved much but there is slack under there, and you need to pull the fabric and the button forward until the back two holes are exposed. Position them where you're wanting them and then drop the presser foot again. Back to manually winding the machine to make sure that it hits the first hole and the second hole where you're wanting it to, and then you can press go. The up position with your needle, and you can lift the presser foot and remove the button. Exactly the same as the first button, you're left with 4 threads, and you need to get the front 2 threads to the back. So turn the fabric over, pull on one of the threads until you get a loop come through from the front, and the same with this thread. Again, tie them in a knot to secure them. There you have a 4-hole button attached. What I'm going to do next is to attach this much bigger button, just to show you that the foot can cope with larger buttons as well, but I'm actually going to secure it in a cross formation, and this is not something that it suggests in the handbook, but we're going to see if we can manage it and see what happens. It's a little bit of a test. So I've already had a bit of a play with this one on the presser foot, just to make sure that there's enough space to go between the 2 holes, and there just about is. So I'm actually not going to measure from the centres, I'm going to measure just on the inside of the circle to just on the inside of the other circle. Looking at 5 millimeters. I will just go to 5.5. So I'm going to place the button into the presser foot, and as you can see there's only just enough space on the diagonal to allow for this to happen. So it could be a little bit risky, but we'll see how we go. Drop the presser foot, keep the threads out the way. Drop the needle into the first hole, there's only just enough space there, and drop it into the second hole. It's moved the button across, so I'm just going to nudge it so that there is the space, and I don't think I'm going to let the machine do this for me. I'm going to do it so that I can just guide it and that I'm not breaking anything. So this is me manually moving the machine so that it isn't hitting the button with force and breaking the needle or throwing anything off in the machine. Okay. Now I'm going to take this off and turn the button around so that I can hit the other holes. Drop the presser foot and start again. I would say that the middle prong has moved over and it's not going to let me do that. So this is a bit of a fail, but I tried. So you do have to stick with doing your buttons with the straight lines. You can't do it crisscross. So I admit defeat, this one was a bit of a fail. What happens is when you take this off of the foot and twist it around, the line of sewing that you've already done is in the way of that middle foot, which pushes it over into the line of the needle. So it doesn't work doing it crisscrossed. You have to keep it straight. So I'm going to continue to do these other 3 straight buttons just so that you can see how many different types of buttons the buttonhole foot accommodates. The finished product, so this now acts as another sort of tester sheet to remind us how we're going to do the buttons in the future. This is the first one we did, the 2-hole button, and then we went on to the 4-hole button and we did it in the parallel line version. I then tried and failed, but at least I tried the crisscross version, and at least I know that that now can't be done, and this is a reminder to me of that. This is it's actually a slightly bowed button, but it still works in that presser foot. You've got the average sort of child-sized baby cardigan button, and it works on that, and all the way down to the teeny tiny decorative buttons, and it works brilliantly on that. So this saves you a lot of work being able to just attach buttons on the machine, so you're not having to thread needles all the time, find the holes in the right places. It leaves you with very even looking work and beautifully finished pieces. So here we have our little button crib sheet, and that fits very nicely with the other crib sheets that we did in the other tutorials. I will link them in the description below so you can go back and have a look. And then next week we will combine this one and the buttonhole tutorial to make ourselves something a little bit special. I hope you found this video interesting and helpful, or at least some of it, and it's shown you how the buttonhole foot is incredibly useful and not at all scary. Thank you for watching to the end, and I will be back again soon with another how-to tutorial.